AI minds, quantum leaps. Cut the noise, dive deep. Truth unlocked. Dr. Mike on the mic. Tech Unfiltered is on the clock. Now it's time for the show.
OpenAI has signed a long-term agreement for computing capacity at a former uranium enrichment site in southern Ohio. That may sound like a local construction story, but it reveals something important about artificial intelligence. A tool that feels almost weightless in a browser depends on land, power plants, transmission lines, cooling systems, chips, skilled labor, and very large financial commitments. On August 17th, 2026, OpenAI announced that it had secured approximately 8 gigawatts of computing capacity at the PORTS-Pike Technology Campus in Pike County, Ohio. The campus is being developed by SB Energy, which is backed by SoftBank. SB Energy will build, own, and operate the data center. OpenAI will be the tenant under a 20-year lease. OpenAI says it will begin paying only as completed capacity becomes available. The first 800 megawatts are expected in 2028, followed by additional phases. The project remains dependent on permits, environmental reviews, infrastructure, and financing. The location is significant. The campus spans private land and remediated federal land at the former Portsmouth gaseous diffusion plant, which once enriched uranium for national security work. The Department of Energy says SB Energy has committed to accelerate cleanup and remediation as part of the redevelopment. A site associated with Cold War industry is being repurposed for the infrastructure behind modern artificial intelligence. The scale needs careful explanation. 8 gigawatts refers to the planned computing load. It does not mean the project is an 8-gigawatt power plant. Comparisons with a fixed number of homes can also mislead because actual output, utilization, grid conditions, and household consumption vary. The safer point is that this is power plant scale, not office building scale. The supporting plan calls for at least 10 gigawatts of new generation. A Department of Energy fact sheet from March says at least 9.2 gigawatts would come from natural gas. The plan also includes about $4.2 billion of new transmission infrastructure with AEP Ohio. In other words, the computing campus requires its own large network of generation and power delivery. The Department of Energy says SB Energy will pay for the transmission work and use a dedicated data center rate structure intended to protect other customers from those direct project costs. It also says the project can temporarily reduce its electricity use or provide backup power during emergencies. Those are meaningful commitments, but they are still commitments. Regulators and residents will need to compare the final contracts and operating results with what was promised. The financing is just as notable. Nvidia will be the exclusive provider of computing infrastructure at the campus, including processors, networking, and supporting systems. Nvidia is also investing $1.5 billion in SB Energy. In a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Nvidia disclosed residual value guarantees related to leases covering roughly 4.25 gigawatts of computing load. Its initial aggregate payment obligation is capped at $105 billion. Nvidia may also choose to provide credit support for roughly another 3.8 gigawatts. That does not mean Nvidia has paid OpenAI or SB Energy $105 billion. It is a cap on a conditional guarantee. If OpenAI becomes insolvent and defaults or fails to make lease payments, Nvidia may have to cover a shortfall between the guaranteed lease value and the amount recovered through a replacement lease or sale. OpenAI has agreed to repay Nvidia for amounts Nvidia actually pays. The obligation can end under specified conditions, including the 20th anniversary of a lease, a permitted lease termination, or OpenAI achieving a satisfactory credit rating. The practical summary is that the chip supplier is also an investor and a financial backstop for a campus that will exclusively use its computing systems. Axios noted that this overlapping relationship raises a question about circular financing in the artificial intelligence sector. This structure also explains why the story matters beyond one company. Financing a campus of this size requires a developer, a long-term tenant, power and transmission agreements, permits, lenders, and a supplier willing to support the project. The constraint on artificial intelligence is no longer just whether engineers can design a more capable model. It is whether the physical and financial system can be assembled around that model at a sustainable cost. That is not proof of a bubble, fraud, or an inevitable loss. It does mean that the company's financial risks are closely connected. The useful question is whether long-term demand and cash flow from actual users can support the infrastructure being built. OpenAI says it expects to fund its lease commitments with revenue, business cash flow, and capital raised from investors. This is a forward-looking funding plan. It does not show that every future payment is already funded. The project sponsors also make large claims about jobs and community benefits. Here are the numbers carefully. OpenAI estimates 35,000 construction jobs during a 6-year build-out through 2032 and 2,500 long-term operating jobs. Nvidia uses the broader phrase tens of thousands of Ohio jobs. An earlier Department of Energy fact sheet estimated more than 10,000 construction jobs over 4 years and more than 2,000 operating jobs. Those numbers should not be blended. Construction work is temporary and spread across years. Operating jobs are the longer-term positions. All of these figures are projections from project sponsors or government supporters, not measured outcomes. OpenAI says it will add $40 million to SB Energy's previously announced $40 million community benefit fund for $80 million combined. It also says it will provide up to $84 million in Codex credits to eligible Ohio College, community college, and technical school students who are at least 18 years old during the 2026 to 2027 academic year. The offer is $100 in credits for each eligible account, covering about 844,000 students. Those credits may be useful, but their stated retail value is not the same as a cash appropriation. OpenAI has promised annual public reports covering local hiring, community investment, water use, and project-related energy use. That reporting matters because launch day projections should eventually be compared with evidence. Water is another area where the distinction between a claim and a complete footprint matters. OpenAI says the facility will use closed-loop, air-cooled systems that recirculate water rather than cooling towers that continuously consume it. After the system is filled, the company says ongoing direct water use should be comparable to an office building serving a similar number of people, including restrooms, cleaning, maintenance, and landscaping. That claim concerns direct water use at the data center. It does not measure water used elsewhere in fuel production, power generation, or chip manufacturing. Lower direct water consumption also does not mean a low climate impact. With at least 9.2 gigawatts of natural gas generation in the plan, emissions, pipelines, air quality, and reliability remain legitimate public questions. So here are 3 practical ways to evaluate this project and others like it. First, follow who pays. SB Energy says a dedicated data center rate structure will cover the new power and transmission infrastructure rather than shifting those project costs to ordinary Ohio ratepayers. That commitment should be verified as the project develops, and it does not eliminate every possible indirect effect on regional energy markets. Second, separate projections from measurements. Construction jobs, permanent jobs, water use, emissions, tax revenue, community grants, and student credits should be tracked through public data, not only opening day announcements. Third, remember the physical supply chain beneath the convenience. Artificial intelligence depends on chips, power plants, substations, pipelines, land, labor, water systems, and financing. That does not make ordinary use of these tools inherently irresponsible. It means communities, users, regulators, and investors are entitled to credible accounting. Artificial intelligence may arrive through a simple chat window, but its infrastructure now has a clear address in Pike County, Ohio. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes. Until next time, take care.